On this Thursday night, promising to make housing more affordable. Vying for votes with pledges that hit close to home.
1 million homes in the next 3 years.
Our focus is very clearly on making sure people have homes in their budget.
Calling the shots where the leaders and voters stand on mandatory vaccinations. The danger as Afghans desperately try to escape the Taliban. As the Prime Minister admits Canada can only do so much.
To get many people out, as many as we'd want, is going to be almost impossible.
And high-tech wedding planning.
This is amazing! I wouldn't miss this, baby.
The surprise that had a Canadian bridal party beaming.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the most basic of issues every Canadian confronts, the cost of housing. It is on the rise everywhere. Whether you rent or are trying to buy, housing affordability is a key issue in the federal election campaign. Soaring home prices are squeezing many Canadians out of the market, and lower income families languish on waiting lists for affordable housing. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, the average sale price of a home in Canada jumped more than 15% in July compared to last year. The average cost is now $662,000. The federal parties all say they know housing is too expensive and they have plans to fix it. In our top story tonight, Abigail Bimman looks at those promises.
Yeah.
Like many Canadians, affordable housing is an issue for Nicole Farrow.
I do think we need some stability in the property market. I mean, everybody is concerned about what's going to happen if interest rates go up in the next 5 years.
Affordability has become such a problem, two major parties dropped plans to tackle it in the first week of the campaign.
We have a housing crisis in Canada. We will implement our plan to kickstart the building of 1 million homes in the next 3 years.
Conservatives say they'll reach that goal in part by selling off and transforming unused federal real estate and by focusing on building homes close to transit.
Sometimes in the past, this hasn't been at the center of the Conservative Party's platform the way that I think it needs to be for the sake of all cities in Canada.
The Conservatives' plan is not going to create homes that are within people's budgets. Our focus is very clearly on making sure people have homes in their budgets.
New Democrats are promising to create 500,000 affordable housing spaces in 10 years, while the Liberals haven't yet announced their plan, but have been criticized for not building promised affordable spaces fast enough.
Significant new investments in housing that I'm looking forward to speaking about in the coming weeks.
All three parties want to tackle foreign home buyers driving up prices. Conservatives want an outright ban for 2 years. The Liberals promised a 1% annual tax in the last budget, and the NDP would slap on a one-time 20% tax.
That one would make the most sense. 20%, I think, would require more consideration for, a $1.5 million house, for example.
Professor Paul Kershaw is calling for policy changes that stop rising prices, potentially unpopular for voting homeowners who like their increased value.
That looks really great for me as a homeowner, but it is eroding the affordability for those who walk in my footsteps. We need parties to acknowledge it. And right now, none of the parties is being that brave.
Kershaw adds, since none of the platforms is costed, we won't really know which plan is most effective until we learn the devil in the details. Donna?
All right, Abigail. Erin O'Toole faced a lot of questions about something else, too, in the party platform. It says, we will protect the conscience rights of healthcare professionals. There's no other detail. The party says its focus is on doctors who don't want to perform medical assistance in dying, but it could also include those who don't want to refer patients for things like gender reassignment surgery and abortion. How is O'Toole handling questions about this?
Donna, the abortion question comes up at some point on every campaign and certainly was an albatross around the neck of O'Toole's predecessor, Andrew Scheer. O'Toole very much trying to brand himself as a new progressive type of Conservative leader and has stressed multiple times on the trail that he is pro-choice. Thursday, he pushed back against the idea that it's a contradiction to be pro-choice and support conscience rights, saying there can be a balance.
Well, I'm pro-choice, and I want to make sure that access for women to those services are available across the country. It's an important right I will not only defend. I think we can also defend conscience rights for our incredible men and women on the front lines in our healthcare system.
But O'Toole was not clear on the issue of referrals. Under Ontario law, a doctor refusing to provide an abortion must provide a referral to another practitioner. So until he is more clear on that point, don't expect this issue to disappear anytime soon. Donna?
All right, Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thanks. Healthcare is also top of mind for Canadians. It was the focus of the NDP campaign today. Leader Jagmeet Singh promises to create a $250 million fund to hire and train 2,000 nurses across Canada. He made that announcement in Edmonton, where the NDP is hoping to gain some ground. Mike Couteur is there.
After not even setting foot in Alberta for the 2019 election campaign, Jagmeet Singh strode into Edmonton, confident he can gain seats in this province. To do that, he waded into provincial jurisdiction, pledging to create a $250 million fund specifically to train and hire nurses, a move he says that would reverse years of healthcare cuts.
Those cuts at the federal level from Justin Trudeau and those cuts from Jason Kenney are making it so it's so difficult for these workers.
If you're keeping score at home, Singh mentioned United Conservative Premier Jason Kenney's name 7 times in his morning media availability, and federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole just once.
Absolutely, we're going to point to Jason Kenney and his bad decisions that hurt people. We're going to point to Conservatives that can't be trusted with healthcare.
A prime example of how Singh is hoping to parlay his provincial party's popularity into federal seats.
If you were to look at polls now, the NDP provincially would sweep the province, but yet they have a problem federally. But Jagmeet Singh is more popular now than he was 2 years ago.
But it's not just a two-party race in Edmonton. The Liberals were shut out in 2019, but are looking to take back 2 seats in this city.
So it's not the NDP versus the Conservatives in Edmonton. It's the NDP versus the Liberals versus the Conservatives in Edmonton.
But not all provincial NDP support will flow to Singh. He and Rachel Notley have not always been on the same page, especially when it comes to pipelines or the oil and gas industry.
Her strategy has been to strike a balance between energy and the environment, whereas Jagmeet Singh is focused much more on opposing things like pipelines and specific projects.
It's a really delicate dance for Singh, so when he was asked about Notley's support, he chose to focus on the issues that they can agree on rather than the ones that they don't. Donna?
All right, Michael Couture in Edmonton, thank you. Now to the West Coast, where the Liberals made a big push today for the senior vote. Justin Trudeau says if re-elected, his government would invest $9 billion to help provinces and territories improve long-term care. That includes training up to 50,000 new personal support workers and providing all personal support workers a minimum wage of at least $25 an hour.
Our investments will allow us to create more beds, improve facilities, and increase infection prevention. And because provinces have different realities, we'll work together to make sure that everyone gets the support they need.
It is day 5 of the campaign, and both Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh have spent 2 full days in British Columbia. There is a good reason that province is full of electoral races that any of the 3 parties might win. Our chief political correspondent David Akin reports on the battle for BC.
Welcome to Port Moody.
The Liberal leader's visit to this suburb east of Vancouver Wednesday followed a visit here Tuesday by the NDP leader.
I'm really excited to be here in Port Moody, Coquitlam.
There's a good reason Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau were here in week 1 of this election campaign. This riding, the riding of Port Moody, Coquitlam, was the single closest race in the entire country in 2019. Conservative Nellie Shin won by just 153 votes over the second-place New Democrat. The Liberals finished third, about 1,100 votes back. This in a riding where more than 54,000 people voted. But Port Moody Coquitlam is just one of more than a dozen ridings here in BC that feature tight 3-way races. For the Liberals, success in BC is critical for their path back to majority. And Trudeau is banking on his personal connection to the province to win these tight races.
I always talk about my BC roots. Well, they are particularly poignant right here because I have my 2 aunts, Betsy, 2 of my aunts, Betsy and Heather.
But polls show many voters are looking favorably on Singh's NDP, and Erin O'Toole's Conservatives must defend what they have here if they have any hope of forming government.
BC is a tough place to call. You could plausibly come up with any scenario that sees any of the three main parties capturing the most seats at the end of this election.
But which party will separate itself from the pack and how? Well, candidates on the ground here say that the winning party has to make a compelling case on two issues key to BC voters. First, fighting climate change, and second, finding a way to make housing more affordable for middle-class voters. Donna?
All right, David Akin in beautiful Victoria, BC, thanks. Another major Canadian jurisdiction is implementing mandatory vaccines. The City of Toronto says by October 30th, all city workers must be double dosed against COVID-19, with a few exceptions. The move to mandate vaccines is picking up steam across Canada. Today, Ontario Premier Doug Ford kicked one of his MPPs out of caucus for refusing to get vaccinated. And late last week, the Liberals promised to make vaccines mandatory for federal workers and domestic travelers. As Eric Sorensen reports, polling does show the idea has broad public support.
Hope you go to jail. Great to see you guys. As a rule, politicians don't like hecklers, but when groups tried to shout down the Liberal leader for mandating vaccinations, it was a scrap he seemed happy to get into.
Across the country, they're stepping up to get vaccinated, to keep each other safe.
On the eve of the election call, Justin Trudeau declared vaccinations for federal civil servants mandatory, drawing a distinction with the Conservatives.
I will respect the personal health decisions of Canadians.
Aaron O'Toole is pro-vaccine but would not make them mandatory. Trudeau left no wiggle room. Absent a medical reason, vaccines are a must for civil servants, or else
there will be consequences.
Why come down so unequivocally on this issue? Perhaps because most voters have done so. An Ipsos survey found 80% of Canadians support mandatory vaccinations for federal public servants. And for teachers, it's 81%. And for healthcare workers, 84% of Canadians want vaccines to be mandatory. And among Liberal voters, all of these numbers are above 90%. Even 3/4 of Conservative voters support mandatory vaccinations. Most Canadians also support proof of vaccines for travel on trains and planes. And more than 2/3 back vaccine passports to enter restaurants, gyms, and other indoor venues.
There really is no debate. People think that vaccines should be ubiquitous, and they think that they should be directed and even mandatory.
There's growing urgency because the Delta variant is proving tenacious. After dipping below 400 COVID cases in mid-July, there are now more than 2,000 a day in this country. Not as many as in the third wave, but the fourth wave is building. It's hoped mandatory vaccines will keep this wave under control, though it means some will get vaccinated under duress, says this ethicist.
They will receive this and they will not want it, and they'll be doing that to protect their livelihoods.
It should also protect the health of other Canadians.
The City of Toronto will implement a mandatory requirement for staff to be fully vaccinated.
More governments at all levels are opting for mandatory vaccines, and while opponents are vocal, there is broad public support for them. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Concerns about where polling stations may be set up. Coming up, should voters mark their ballots inside schools? Plus, the race to rescue Afghans. The Prime Minister admits it's not going to happen fast. Men and some women marching through Kabul today, bravely waving the Afghan flag, marking their country's Independence Day and defying the Taliban, who now control the country. Thousands are still trying to escape on flights, pleading with Canada and other countries to take them in. Today, Prime Minister Trudeau, who has promised to resettle more than 20,000 Afghans, admitted it is easier said than done.
It is going to be very, very difficult to get many people out. We will get some, certainly. But to get many people out, as many as we'd want, is going to be almost impossible in the coming weeks.
The U.S. and NATO forces now control the airport, and Trudeau said again today that Canadian evacuation flights will land soon, but there is still no timeline. And as Jackson Proskow reports, the clock is ticking.
The only way out is through Kabul's airport, where desperate scenes play out as Afghans and foreign citizens rush to the gates. To get this far, they must navigate checkpoints and roadblocks manned by Taliban fighters. who sometimes fire shots into the air and beat people back. The U.S. has warned it cannot ensure safe passage to the airport.
We maintain a watchful eye and are continuously conducting in-depth assessments to protect the safety of Americans.
Hundreds of additional U.S. troops are on the ground. American warplanes patrol above. Around 2,000 people per day are now leaving, far below the U.S. goal, but still an improvement. This fragile exit strategy is all there is. Blindsided by the rapid fall of Afghanistan, the U.S. is stuck in an awkward truce with the Taliban.
It is to the advantage, actually, of the Taliban not to cross the United States on this, because there are 5,000 American troops there. If they wanted, they could probably drive the Taliban out of Kabul.
U.S. President Joe Biden has suggested American troops may have to remain beyond a self-imposed August 31st deadline. He remains unapologetic about the disastrous American exit.
The idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens.
Already there are signs of turbulent days ahead as some Afghans push back against Taliban rule. It's that unknown future that's driving thousands to flee, while they still can. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Despair and anger is growing in Haiti over the slow pace of aid reaching earthquake victims there.
Hurry up, hurry up!
Crowds gathered outside an airport near Lake Hai to watch supplies be loaded onto trucks. Aid is now trickling into Haiti, but tens of thousands of people still need help. More than 2,100 people died in Saturday's 7.2 earthquake, and there are still fears that number may rise. Where to put polling stations still ahead, the calls to keep them out of schools. Canadians head to the polls September 20th, and though more mail-in ballots than ever are expected, millions of people will still go to polling stations to mark their ballots in person. Often those stations are set up inside schools, and this year Elections Canada is running into some roadblocks. Jamie Morocker explains.
Should we both swing at the same time?
Winnipeg father of two, Brent Johnson, doesn't mind the possibility of a polling station at his son's school.
It's been a challenging year and a half for schools, and I fear this could be one more disruption, but it's only one day.
But on September 20th, Manitoba's premier says schools in his province are off limits to Elections Canada. New Brunswick has also decided school facilities won't be used as polling stations, citing the risk of COVID exposure to unvaccinated kids under 12. Ontario's top doctor expressed his concerns too.
Additional people coming into that venue may be a risk to the public.
As first reported by Global News, Elections Canada won't be mandating its poll workers get vaccinated. Instead, it says it will focus on masks, physical distancing, and sanitizing.
There has not been outbreaks of COVID as a result of in-person voting.
But only Nova Scotia, which just voted 2 days ago, has held an election during the Delta-driven fourth wave.
The concern with Delta right now is that we know that it is a variant that is much more highly transmissible than any of the other variants we've seen before.
Still, the president of the Canadian Teachers Federation, Sam Hammond, is confident if the health and safety protocols are strictly followed, it doesn't view polling in schools as a problem at this time. Health experts say if we minimize indoor interactions through mail-in ballots or alternative settings,
perhaps polling stations can be, not in the gymnasium, they can be outdoors.
We can exercise the essential right to vote while keeping kids safe. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
Beamed up next, the wedding dream that became a virtual reality. So many couples have postponed weddings during the pandemic or downsized the guest list. Others have found ingenious ways to bring people together. A groom in Ontario who knew his bride wanted her best friend in England to be there found a way to make her dream a virtual reality. Redmond Shannon has their story.
All right, do we have everybody?
Jeff Gallant and his new wife Brittany finally tied the knot this month after some pandemic disruptions.
We had planned our wedding for May 29th, 2021 at the Royal York Hotel downtown Toronto.
Ultimately, it was last August, I suppose, when Brittany had the foresight to change it to Niagara-on-the-Lake.
That set the stage for a perfect outdoor ceremony.
The only thing missing
one of the bridesmaids stuck here in the UK due to pandemic travel restrictions. So with just a week to go to the wedding, Jeff secretly searched for a surprise solution.
I just went on Google and I typed in top global hologram or holographic companies, and lo and behold, Art Media was at the top.
He was very articulate and I thought would be great on camera. And so I said, hey, no promises, but we'll try to make it happen in this schedule.
That needed Sarah, the bridesmaid, to go to the company's London studio in the middle of the night, ready for the big reveal.
So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to one of Brittany's bridesmaids from London, Sarah Reddington.
Ring, ring. London calling. Oh my God!
She was more or less indistinguishable from all the other bridesmaids. Like my aunts, as an example, they felt that they were on Star Trek. Like literally.
It was pretty trippy though, I have to say. It felt like we were in the future.
A space-age way to cross an ocean.
We still would have had an amazing wedding nonetheless, of course.
Cherry on top.
But really it was the cherry on top.
Art Media normally charges $25,000 for a hologram broadcast, but cut the couple a special deal for their special day. Not a bad wedding present. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Very nice. And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Here Canada is the Big Muddy Badlands in Castle Butte, Saskatchewan. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com or beam it in. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.